darah yang memutih tulang, kerinduan untuk Indonesia tempatku berpulang. Sejarah mengakar sejak saya lahir, semangat yang tak akan lekang hingga akhir. Indonesia hidup bernafas dalam geram tubuhku. Meski ke tanah seberang ku habisi waktu, tetap raga ini mengantar mimpi ibu pertiwi. Junjung naba baik, tinggi, tinggi.
Walaupun banyak negeri ku jalani, yang masyhur permadi kata orang, tetapi kampung dan rumahku di sanalah ku merasa senang. Tanahku tak ku lupakan. Engkau ku banggakan. Tanah airku tidak ku lupakan, kan terkenal selama hidupku. Biarpun saya pergi jauh, tidak akan hilang dari kalbu. Tanahku yang ku cintai, engkau ku hargai. Tanah airku tidak ku lupakan, kan terkenal selama hidupku. Biarpun saya pergi jauh, tidak akan hilang dari kalbu. Tanahku yang ku cintai, engkau ku hargai.
Yang memerah darah, yang memutih tulang, kerinduan untuk Indonesia tempatku berpulang. Sejarah mengakar sejak saya lahir, semangat yang tak akan lekang hingga akhir. Indonesia hidup bernafas dalam geram tubuhku. Meski ke tanah seberang ku habisi waktu, tetap raga ini mengantar mimpi ibu pertiwi. Junjung naba baik, tinggi, tinggi.
Walaupun banyak negeri ku jalani, yang masyhur permadi kata orang, tetapi kampung dan rumahku di sanalah ku merasa senang. Tanahku tak ku lupakan. Engkau ku banggakan. Tanah airku tidak ku lupakan, kan terkenang selama hidupku. Biarpun saya pergi jauh, tidak akan hilang dari kalbu. Tanah
Selamat pagi semuanya. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Well, ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? Our opening ceremony is about to begin. Please have a nice seat and enjoy. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Swastiastu. Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan, Rahayu. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the seminars. It's a big, great honor for me, Senokto, to be standing here. Welcome each and every one of you in the seminar, Talk About Batik Conservation with great speaker from USA, Julia M. Brennan. Batik is a phenomenon of the creation of a fashion culture that it's so legendary in Indonesia. It's not only beauty that makes batik a product known to the world, but the manufacturing process is able to add the charm of one of these Indonesian masterpieces. Greeting to all of us, the Honorable Head of DKI Jakarta Provincial Culture Office, Mr. Iwan Henry Wardana, the Honorable Head of DKI Jakarta Provincial Culture Heritage Conservation Center, Mrs. Linda Eriani, the Honorable Head of Art Museum Management Unit, Mrs. S.T. Utami, the Honorable Head of Division Protection, DKI Jakarta Provincial Culture Office, Mr. Norviadi, the Honorable Chairman of the DKI Jakarta Museum Association Paramita Jaya, Mr. Yiyo Teherlambang, the Honorable Speakers, Mrs. Julia M. Brennan, Textile Conservator from Washington, D.C., USA, the Honorable Head of Museum, Gallery, Monuments, and Conservation Center and Cultural Institution Communities, and also Excellency distinguished guests, audience, media partners, seminars, and participants. Firstly, let's say thanks to our God, Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, the Lord of the world, the Lord of the universe, who has been giving us his blessing and mercy, so we can get gather in this place without something wrong happen. Amen. This event was held thanks to the collaboration of the DKI Provincial Culture Office, DKI Jakarta Provincial Cultural Heritage Conservation Center, in collaboration with DKI Jakarta Museum Association Paramita Jaya, the management unit of the Art Museum, and media partner, Trans 7. Ladies and gentlemen, Let we start. Here I am, Senokto Priyankartino, Ambassador for the DKI Jakarta Museum, Ami Paramita Jaya. Welcome to the Batik Conservation with Julia M. Brennan. As Master of Ceremony, I will guide this seminar. There is some agenda. The first agenda is opening. The second agenda is the singing of the national anthem of Indonesia Raya. The third agenda is greeting. The greeting will be delivered by the Honorable DKI Jakarta Provincial Cultural Heritage Conservation Center, Mrs. Linda Eriani. The second greeting will be delivered by Honorable Chairman of DKI Jakarta Museum Association Paramita Jaya, Mr. Hiyo Teherlambang. The third greeting will be delivered by Honorable Head of DKI Jakarta Provincial Culture, Mr. Iwan Henry Wardana. The sixth agenda is a speech and explanation from the speaker, Mrs. Julia Brennan, textile conservator from Washington, USA. The seventh agenda is a question and answer session. The last agenda is closing and photo session. Don't forget to fill the timesheet link to coordinate the e-certificate after the event. Don't forget to turn on your video camera. All right. All blessed audience, the first agenda is opening. Let's start this agenda by reading Basmalah together. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The second agenda is a singing national anthem of Indonesia Raya. Participants are welcome to stand up and turn on the video. Then we will start to hear the Indonesia Raya. Thank you very much, audience. Thank you for still connect to us. The third agenda is a greetings. The first greetings is from our Indonesian head of the DKI Jakarta Provincial Cultural Heritage Conservation Center, Mrs. Linda Eriani. To Mrs. Linda Eriani, the time is yours.
Thank you, Bang Sena. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
The Honorable Chairman of Cultural Department, Jakarta Capital City Government, Mr. Iwan Henry Wardana, the Honorable Head of Jakarta Art Museum, Ibu Esti Utami, the Honorable Chairman of Jakarta Museum Association, Bapak Hiyo Teherlambang, the Honorable, our special speaker, Mrs. Julian. I would like to say thank you to you for giving the time to join with us and share about your experiences and knowledge in conservation, especially in batik conservation that you have already done. And I know it's already night in Washington, D.C. at the moment, Ms. Julia. The honorable all participants, ladies and gentlemen, let me deliver my next speech in Bahasa Indonesia. Puji syukur kehadirat Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, tidak henti-hentinya kita panjatkan, karena berkat karunia-Nya kita diberikan kesehatan dan kekuatan sehingga kita bisa melaksanakan dan mengikuti webinar ini dalam keadaan sehat walafiat. Saya mengucapkan selamat datang kepada seluruh peserta webinar. Semoga seluruh peserta dalam keadaan sehat walafiat. Kegiatan webinar ini berjudul Talk About Batik Conservation. Ini kita laksanakan dalam rangka memperingati Hari Batik Nasional yang jatuh pada tanggal 2 Oktober 2020. Dan seperti kita ketahui bersama bahwa batik telah ditetapkan sebagai warisan budaya dunia oleh UNESCO pada tanggal 22 Oktober 2009 yang kemudian melalui keputusan Presiden nomor 33 tahun 2009, tanggal 2 Oktober ditetapkan sebagai Hari Batik Nasional. Kegiatan webinar ini juga sekaligus juga memperingati Hari Museum Indonesia yang jatuh pada tanggal 12 Oktober 2020. Bapak Ibu yang saya hormati, Pusat Konservasi Cagar Budaya adalah unit pelaksana teknis Dinas Kebudayaan Provinsi DKI Jakarta, mengemban tugas melaksanakan pelestarian dan konservasi cagar budaya. Selama beberapa dekade ini, Pusat Konservasi telah melakukan konservasi, koleksi dari berbagai bahan, jenis tekstil dan jenis logam, jenis kayu, dan lain sebagainya. Dan kita juga melakukan konservasi jenis tekstil di Museum Tekstil Jakarta, Indonesia, di Istana Negara. Dengan terselenggaranya webinar ini, kami ingin berbagi pengetahuan tentang bagaimana memelihara dan merawat dengan baik suatu benda yang berbahan tekstil kepada masyarakat luas. Dan tentunya dengan narasumber yang insya Allah mumpuni dalam bidangnya. Kali ini beliau adalah senior textile conservator, memiliki jam pengalaman yang tinggi, dan pernah melakukan konservasi terhadap hiasan dinding batik karya Iwan Tirta di koleksi Kedutaan Besar Amerika di Jakarta. Bapak Ibu yang saya hormati, batik merupakan salah satu unsur budaya Indonesia dan telah menjadi ciri khas bangsa Indonesia. Batik juga sudah berkembang, memiliki corak, memiliki ciri khas, motif di berbagai daerah, dan di setiap motif memiliki makna filosofis yang sangat menarik. Batik juga berkembang menjadi dari berbagai segi, dari segi teknologi pembuatan berawal dari batik dilakukan tulis tangan, sekarang berkembang menjadi menggunakan teknologi printing. Kemudian dari pemanfaatan batik tidak hanya digunakan sebagai pakaian untuk berbagai acara, tetapi seni batik juga digunakan untuk pernak-pernik perlengkapan penampilan atau aksesoris yang biasa dikenakan masyarakat Indonesia seperti kalung, sepatu, dasi, tas, hingga peralatan rumah tangga. Dan di masa pandemi ini ternyata motif batik juga sangat menarik digunakan sebagai masker. Dari segi pelestarian, selain telah ditetapkan sebagai warisan budaya dunia, batik juga merupakan pakaian wajib yang digunakan pada hari-hari tertentu, seperti di pemerintah Provinsi DKI Jakarta, kami seluruh karyawannya wajib menggunakan batik pada setiap hari Kamis. Bapak Ibu yang saya hormati, perlu kami informasikan bahwa peserta webinar ini berasal dari berbagai daerah, dari Batam, Sumatera Utara, Sumatera Barat, Sumatera Selatan, Jakarta, Jawa Barat, Yogyakarta, Jawa Tengah, Jawa Timur, dan wilayah lainnya. Dan alhamdulillah ternyata harapan kami bisa tercapai, yaitu peserta webinar ini terdiri dari berbagai unsur, yaitu para konservator, kurator, kolektor, pemerhati batik, komunitas wastra, dan masyarakat luas, termasuk juga para pemangku kebijakan. Dari pendaftaran yang kita list pendaftaran yang kita lakukan itu lebih dari 100 orang yang telah mendaftar. Maaf, 100 orang di Zoom meeting ini, kemudian ada yang bergabung di YouTube Live. Saya merasa surprise karena informasi yang kita sampaikan pada tanggal 26 September pada pukul 8 malam, ternyata subuh jam 5 sore Zoom meeting seat-nya sudah penuh. Terima kasih atas peserta yang sudah mendaftar, dan Zoom meeting ini seminar ini kita bisa lihat di YouTube Live, dan di Zoom maupun di YouTube Live itu juga kita akan memberikan sertifikat setelah para peserta mengisi daftar absen melalui link yang akan diberikan. So there is some souvenir from Pusat Konservasi Cagar Budaya untuk para peserta yang akan memberikan pertanyaan, dan panitia akan memilih the good and the best question related to the seminar, dan kami akan mengirim souvenir kepada alamat masing-masing. Pada kesempatan yang berbahagia ini, saya juga mengucapkan terima kasih kepada Asosiasi Museum Indonesia DKI Paramita Jaya DKI Jakarta, kemudian Museum Seni Jakarta, Trans TV, seluruh SKPD dan UKPD pemerintah Provinsi DKI Jakarta yang telah bekerja sama sehingga webinar ini dapat terselenggara dengan baik. Juga kepada para anggota panitia di belakang layar, Ibu Erlinda, Pak Teguh, Ibu Misyari, kemudian Bang Dimas, Mas Budi, Mas Gali, Mas Iman, kemudian Bang Seno juga sebagai MC, moderator, Bang Ardi, dan semuanya yang tidak dapat saya perhatikan satu persatu sehingga seminar ini bisa terselenggara dengan baik. Semoga acara seminar ini dapat bermanfaat bagi kita semuanya. Mohon maaf jika ada kekurangan dalam penyelenggaraan seminar ini. Saya akhiri sambutan ini dengan membacakan pantun. Jalan-jalan ke kota tua bawa itik. Lihat genteng bangunan etnik. Ayo kita semua gunakan batik agar terlihat ganteng, anggun, dan cantik. Jalan-jalan ke Kolosium, melewati jalan berliku-liku. Mari kita berkunjung ke museum karena museum ada di hatiku. Tidak ada gading yang tak retak. Mohon maaf lahir dan batin. Please enjoy the seminar. Terima kasih. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much for Mrs. Linda Eriani for warming and outstanding greetings. The second greetings is from our chairman of the DKI Jakarta Museum Association Paramita Jaya, Mr. Yiyo P. Herlambang. For Mr. Yiyo, the time is yours.
Thank you, Sena. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi dan salam sejahtera buat kita semua. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan. The Honorable to Head of Provincial Culture DKI Jakarta, Mr. Iwan Henry Wardana, the Honorable to Head of Jakarta Cultural Heritage Conservation Center, Ibu Linda Endriani, and then of course the Honorable to Mrs. Yulia M. Brennan, the Textile Conservator from Washington DC as a keynote speaker, and the Honorable to all the head of Mugalimo, Museum, Gallery, and Monument, and Conservation Center in Jakarta and others province, and of course last but not least, thank you for PKTB, UP Museum Seni, and Trans 7. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having me on this nice occasion. I hope that we are in good health. I come as proud to support this event, the recognitions of excellence in cultural heritage, field represented by batik, one of Indonesian traditional textile that has been declared as a UNESCO heritage icon in 2009. As we all know, batik is a manifestation of local wisdom and local culture, and they should be further developed so as to be better recognized nationally and internationally. Indeed, batik is an essential part of the history of human civilization and do far more than fulfill people's basic needs. They are the living vehicle for traditional technologies and an integral part of our traditional culture. The constant change in our world influence creativity such that our past informs our present and thus future. Museums are the keepers of traditions of history. They collect objects considered to be important to testify to the cultures of the past. Otherwise, not only the object would be lost, but also the knowledge about it, about the object itself, and about its traditional values. Ladies and gentlemen, this webinar can display an important part in our effort to preserve our precious batik and also cultural heritage. Once again, I want to thank you for having me here. I want to extend on behalf of Amida Paramita Jaya a warm welcome to all you participants of this webinar, and I wish you an enjoyable and energizing time, because that is what this event means to me, that it energizes and emphasizes my continued interest in preserving our heritage. Finally, the National Batik Days momentum on October 2 and the National Museum Days, which is on October 12, can be a solid foundation to build synergy between batik artisans, conservators, and museums to keep batik as a part of the nation's culture. I think that is all about my welcome. Thank you for your nice attention. Stay healthy and safe. Wabillahi taufiq walhidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Mr. Yiyo Teherlambang, for the warming greetings. Before we start to the last greetings, we have a teaser video about batiks, courtesy Trans 7 in offering in the framework of celebrating the National Batik Day. Please enjoy.
Batik, karya agung warisan kemanusiaan milik bangsa Indonesia. Torehan di atas ambal berjuta titik makna, menyelimuti raga yang lemah, juga menyelaraskan langkah. Membasuh jari jemari, mengurung bala, menjaga kejernihan. Ketabahan membatasi indera dalam menyempurnakan kesembuhan. Batik, harmonisasi cinta, jiwa, dan raga, diiringi harapan juga doa. Batik, karya agung warisan
What a beautiful video that we have. The last greetings is from our head of the DKI Jakarta Provincial Culture Office, Mr. Iwan Henry Wardana. To Mr. Iwan Henry Wardana, the time is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. On October 2nd, 2009, UNESCO has designated batik as an intangible cultural heritage of humanity. As Indonesian, we are proud to wear batik. Several regions in the country have developed various patterns of batik, and it has to be preserved, ground, and maintained as the pride of Indonesian people. Even in our office, Jakarta Provincial Government, once in a week, every Thursday, we are batik in our daily activities at the office. So, batik is the identity and characteristic of Indonesian that is known to the world. In a statement celebrating the National Batik Day and Indonesian Museum Day on October 12th, the Jakarta Center of Cultural Heritage Conservation, Jakarta Art Museum, and Museum Association of Jakarta Paramita Jaya collaborate together, organizing public program about batik conservation webinar. Let us disagree with stereotype that batik is the culture of old people. Instead, it's a contemporary one. Before we get started, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to our international speaker, Ms. Julia Brennan, who made this event come together to become a success. I'm so confident that today will be fun and full of learning. Warmest regard from Jakarta, salam budaya, terima kasih. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. What a warm, wonderful greetings. Well, again, dear participant, we would like to running the movie screening for a profile about the Division of Rotation DKI Jakarta Provincial Culture Office. Please enjoy.
Keberadaan benda cagar budaya merupakan kekayaan budaya bangsa yang begitu penting, tak hanya bagi disiplin ilmu arkeologi dan sejarah, tapi juga untuk pengembangan ilmu pengetahuan. Dalam rangka menjaga kelestarian benda cagar budaya, dibentuklah Pusat Konservasi Cagar Budaya Dinas Kebudayaan Provinsi DKI Jakarta. Sebagai bentuk komitmen dalam melestarikan benda, bangunan, penelitian benda cagar budaya. Pusat Konservasi Benda Cagar Budaya Pemprov DKI memiliki visi melestarikan
Ladies and gentlemen, sorry for inconvenience because the signal is not good at the operators. Well, next we start to the next agenda. It's the main agenda, which we are waiting for. Explanation from the speaker, Mrs. Julia M. Brennan, textile conservator from Washington, D.C., USA. Today's program will be hosted by our moderator, Mr. Adi Haryadi. Don't forget to open up your video. And if you want to ask us, you can raise hand or using hashtag Tanya. After that, you can follow with your question. Mr. Ardi Haryadi is experienced at the Pamong Budaya Ahli Pertama, Bidang Permusiuman of the DKI Jakarta Provincial Culture Office, graduate from ISI Yogyakarta. He is currently assigned as a curator at Jakarta Textile Museum. Well, now to Mr. Ardi Haryadi, the floor is yours. Give a big applause for Mr. Ardi.
Okay, thank you very much, Sena. Good morning,
Yeah,
everyone.
Mr. Ardi.
Is it clearly enough, my voice, Sena?
Yeah, clearly.
Okay, thank you very much.
Obviously.
Yeah, once again, good morning, everyone. I'm Ardi Haryadi, the Pamong Budaya Ahli Pertama of Jakarta's Textile Museum, your moderator of today's talk about batik conservation. And this is hosted by the Jakarta's Cultural Heritage Conservation Center. And I'm very honored and pleased to see every one of you. Indonesian batik is one of Indonesia's great cultural heritages. And this year, we celebrate the 11th year Indonesian batik listed as one of the world intangible cultural heritage by UNESCO. And as the responsibility of a nation, batik must be preserved not only by the government, but also the society. So the younger generation recognize, understands, and loves batik. And not to mention that, it's very delightful that nowadays the society, all generations, are proud wearing batik as their everyday clothes like we are wearing today. So what's next? Of course, taking care of the batik itself, the pieces, not only the museum or gallery collections, but also the pieces that we both kept and often wore as a form of support for the nation's culture. And this morning is very special because as you can see at the promotion, direct from the Washington, D.C., USA, the founder, the owner of Caring for Textiles, Textile Conservation Services, Julia M. Brennan is already joined with us. Julia is born in Surabaya, so she has a strong connection with Indonesia. In 2015, Julia was in Jakarta to conduct training in the conservation of the U.S. Embassy's collection of Iwan Tirta, especially its wall hangings. Julia is a member of Textile Society of America, American Institute for Conservation, AIC, International Institute for Conservation, IIC, International Council of Museum, ICOMCC, and the Washington Conservation Guild, WCG. Well, because we do have 11 hours difference, so good evening, Julia. Hi. Julia, can you hear?
Yes, I can hear you. Good evening. Thank you.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very well. Thank you.
Yeah, we are very honored to have you here with us today. And Julia Brennan will talk about conservation of the 21st century batik, a few case studies that will be in around 40 minutes. And after that, we do have a question and answer session. If you have any concerns, impression of questions, tell us in the chat box. Or if you join us on YouTube Live, leave your question in the live chat box. You can write it down in Bahasa or English. Jadi Bapak Ibu peserta hadirin sekalian bisa menuliskan untuk pertanyaan kepada Julia Brennan bisa menggunakan bahasa Indonesia. So without further ado, Julia, you can start the presentation now.
Okay. And do I share my screen or it's already shared?
You can share the screen.
Okay.
Yes, so the all control is on you.
Oh, well, that is okay.
Yep, that will be perfect.
Okay. So, selamat pagi, everyone, and thank you for joining this very special day, celebrating, well, a whole week of batik culture, not only in Indonesia, but really worldwide. And I'm very honored to be asked to be here and to join you all. I think everyone in the audience knows far more than I do about batik, but I will offer some case studies and a little bit of knowledge from my experience working with batik. I have to say it's really remarkable because If Ibu Ari had asked me to come to Jakarta, that would not be possible. And yet, because of the pandemic, which is so difficult for us all, in fact, we have an opportunity to connect in a way that is more inclusive than ever. So I'm really honored to be with people from all around Jakarta and Indonesia and the world. So thank you all very much. So I guess it was batik, and it was actually the batik of Iwan Tirta that brought me back to Indonesia in 2015. And I begin these case studies with the story about the Iwan Tirta collection at the US Embassy in Jakarta. And here on the left, you see a picture of Iwan with Claire Wolfowitz, the wife of then the ambassador. Around 1985, Iwan had made this specific batik with the American Great Seal in the middle on top of a parang rusak pattern. And it was a very special piece he made for the US Embassy. Next to that is an image of an advertisement for one of his exhibitions in the mid-1970s, late 70s. This was the early 70s and mid-70s was the beginning of Iwan's great revolution of batik wall hangings. Before that, batik was really primarily more of an art form for the body. Of course, it was always decorative, but Iwan pushed those limits and decided to put it on the wall. And he did that with tremendous artistry and color, and everything was barong-barong. And over the course of 10 years or so, members of the US Embassy purchased quite a few of his batiks for display all around the embassy and the chancery. So it is this collection that brought me back to Indonesia in 2015. The next couple pictures you will see is actually the US Embassy and the batiks today. The embassy was renovated and it reopened, and the batiks are now all conserved and framed with plexiglass, and they're displayed throughout the embassy. So it's quite a spectacular collection. I haven't personally seen it. I haven't been to visit, but I hope maybe sometime we all have a chance to visit. The one above was the fabric made for President Ronald Reagan's shirt, designed by Iwan Tirta for one of the large APEC meetings in Indonesia. But this was a long journey. It started, of course, back in the 60s and 70s when Iwan was starting this art form and batik for the wall. And these pieces were collected, they were stretched and framed and put on the wall all over the embassy. And they remained there for decades, 30, almost 40 years. Over the years, they became very dirty and dry and moldy and mildew, and the tropical climate and bad air conditioning and people touching them and the sunlight and the office light. And so by 2015, when they were taken down and we were asked to put together a textile conservation workshop at Museum Textile in Jakarta for the express purpose of conserving this collection so that it could be properly conserved and go back on view in the US Embassy. And then after the conservation project and the workshop, the batiks traveled to the United States for the mounting and the framing. And then in 2019, they traveled back to Jakarta for installation. So they've been going around the globe. Here you see pictures of the Great Seal. This is in the conservation room and workroom at Museum Textile, which is where we held the workshop over 6 or 8 weeks. And the photo below shows me with the DCM, and we're looking at the batik, which is part of the fabric used for the shirt of Ronald Reagan. So here are some of the batik. You can see it's really quite an amazing selection that was purchased over the years. We don't have any records, so we don't know exactly what years each one, but many had suffered from fading, from tears, very brittle, dry. So our first job was actually to remove them from the stretchers, the frames. They were all just stretched around wooden stretcher, just like a painting stretcher. And of course, exposed to a lot of sunlight. So we spent several days removing them from the stretchers so that they would just be a textile without support. And this took quite a lot of time to do carefully. And some of the pieces were actually glued and taped onto plywood. This is not a technique that I would recommend for mounting textiles. I would say it's not very reversible. It was very difficult to break down the glue and the tape and try to remove it, but we used a combination of solvents and also detergent and poultices and mechanical action, and slowly just got the batiks released from the plywood board. But one of the first things we do always in conservation, as you know, is examination and condition reports. And this was extremely important with working with the Iwan Tirta collection, because actually nobody had really examined them. And we needed to make a very good document about the condition, the description, the history, origin, any kind of history we could find out. It was truly wonderful that in the workshop, which combined 20 or more participants from all around Indonesia, but there were also some real specialists from around Jakarta that had known Iwan well, that had worked for him, worked with him. And so the information we were able to gather was really supported by firsthand accounts and tremendous expertise in the community. So looking at the textile is so important, writing down that condition, the information, and being super accurate. These records are for the future, and they're to provide really good ongoing information. And also developing a good vocabulary, not just about description, but about the condition. So we developed our own condition report, but I recommend that every museum, every collection can make their own report, because it should be custom made for the collection or for the type of material. But it's so important to have it detailed. And in addition to, document the important things that you see. It's your eyes that are the window into this history and textile. So here are two of the people in the workshop, and we work in teams doing the documentation and chronicling it all very accurately. Now, lots of places, lots of museums and collections have computer collection systems. And this is a very good idea. I think there's nothing wrong with having a paper system and a computer system. And of course, it's important to identify each textile. This doesn't matter whether it's a batik or any kind of artifact, but for textile in particular, the accession number or ID number can be written on a piece of twill tape or cotton, muslin, and with a non-bleeding pen, and then hand stitched to the textile. It's important not to write on the textile. This is not a good idea. So the first step actually in basic conservation of batik and of textile is surface cleaning. This can remove a lot of the airborne dirt, the pollution, the dust, insects, even batik. Most of the batiks we were working on were cotton, which is cellulose. It's not too delicious for insects, but there's a certain amount of starch and other materials sometimes in the preparation of the batik cloth, which the insects do like. So vacuuming is the first step. And so we use a protective fiberglass screen to place it over the cloth and then vacuum through the screen. And this is just to protect the textile, especially since the batik cloth can be quite thin. It's great if you have a vacuum that has a rheostat. That means that the suction power can be controlled from very high suction to low suction. So here's everyone writing condition reports and vacuuming the textiles. It's really great to work in teams. It's more productive and it's more fun. Photo documentation, set up a clean, good place to do this. And the photo documentation is very important. And we do this before treatment and also after treatment. These are two wonderful examples of some of the early pieces in the US Embassy collection of Iwan's batiks. So not every textile and not every batik needs to be cleaned, but these particular batiks had been hanging on the wall, exposed to climate and Jakarta pollution for 30 plus years. And they were really in bad condition. So I decided that it was best to try and wet clean all of them. This would achieve several things. First of all, they would become cleaner. They might become brighter in color. The wet cleaning will remove a lot of acidity and brownish discoloration. And it can also make the cotton soft and supple again. The batiks, when we first started working with them, they were dry like toast. And if you would try to stitch into it, it would just simply break and crack. So we decided to wet clean them all. However, I would like to say that there are some huge risks to wet cleaning. And there are many textiles that simply cannot be wet cleaned. For example, we have combination silks with metallic threads. And this is a huge problem for wet cleaning because the metallic threads can swell and then the metallic part can unravel and fall apart. So in the case of these batiks, it was simply cotton and the dyes. So please remember that wet cleaning is irreversible. Wet cleaning will remove information, dirt, data, blood, DNA. It can remove history and information that's valuable. So it's a very important consideration before taking this step. The dyes can bleed. And also when a textile is wet, it's extremely heavy and it can be more easily damaged. But there are a lot of benefits to it. So this is a matter of judgment and experience. And it was my belief with this collection of batiks that they would become healthier and stronger in better condition if we were able to wet clean them and try to rehydrate them, remove the acids, and reduce the creases, and perhaps brighten the colors. Now, brighten the colors means remove the dirt. We are not able to bring back the color that has faded because of light. So if a textile is going to be wet cleaned, the first step is to vacuum to remove the loose dirt and the surface dirt. Then testing of the dyes, and this is important to make sure that it's stable enough for the process of wet cleaning. Third, if there are damaged areas, as you see in this photograph, then it's good to protect these holes or the tears with some protective netting before doing the wet cleaning. So here we are, example of testing the dyes, and you can see on this particular batik, the dyes were very fugitive, bleeding very badly. And so this is one of the pieces we did not clean. So the next step is to stabilize those areas temporarily that have the holes or the tears. So you see us here applying the nice tulle net on both sides of the batik like a sandwich in large stitching, and it's temporary. So what did we clean the batiks with? We needed to select a surfactant, chemical or natural. I brought with me to Jakarta several different chemical cleaners that we often use in conservation, that I've used in conservation for many years in the United States and other countries. But we also wanted to talk about and explore the option of using natural cleaner. So one of the options and one of the things we discussed was the use of saponins that appear in plants. And saponin is a natural soap that occurs in plants, and in Asia it occurs in many, many different plants. Some of them you know very well. Top left is lerak or soap nut, and on the right is fenugreek. Below is baimi, which is a plant material we found in Thailand, and then boquet, which is a nut off a tree, and this happened to be from Vietnam. So these were actually part of an entire project and series of workshops that I conducted from about 2016 to 2018. And the scientific testing part of it was led by my colleague, Dr. Lillian Garcia Alonso. And what we wanted to do, what we did was to take plant-based detergents, surfactants, and do a series of tests on both cotton and silk, on both polar and non-polar stains, and compare 4 natural plant surfactants to the chemical cleaners that we commonly use in conservation, and confirm the viability of both of them. So this was a very interesting project, and you can see the visual results on the left. And then these tests, the results were taken back to Mexico for colorimetry tests, and also to compare with commercial detergents and the local saponins in Mexico. So this project that started by looking at some local Southeast Asian surfactants and cleaners has expanded. And in fact, we have a book coming out perhaps in a month or two, finally. And I had several colleagues in Indonesia participate as researchers, and we had researchers throughout all of the ASEAN countries. So here's a table summarizing those 4 plant materials, and they have a very good pH. We discovered that all 4 of them were good for cleaning polar and non-polar stains, and the lerak was quite successful. So this is part of this project that we're doing, which is acknowledging that conservation of material culture and of textiles is also about the conservation of traditional knowledge, which is a form of intangible heritage. And I think that batik is a perfect example of the blending of material culture and intangible culture, because there is so much spirituality in the process of making batik and the motifs, that understanding this deeply and understanding some of the knowledge of the elders and the Ibu who have been cleaning their kain panjang for hundreds of years using lerak was something that was very important to us when we decided that we would be wet cleaning the collection of Iwan Tirta batiks. So here we are with our lerak. And actually, we in fact experimented a little bit with batik attack and some of the lerak recipes that are available on the market. We made our own, and we also used some of the commercial ones. So we built wet tanks, we worked outside, we lined them with plastic sheeting and prepared clean water and worked together in groups. Oops, I'm not advancing. So here we are working together. First, you soak the textile in clean water. For the first 10 minutes, it's only water, and usually a lot of brown water will come out, and this is the acid. And then after about 10 minutes, release that outside of the tank, and then start with fresh water again and the detergent. So it's very important also, after soaking the textile with the detergent for about 10 minutes, then it can be rinsed. And it has to be rinsed carefully and many times. You do not want the soap to remain in the textile. After some time, the soap can break down, it can be sticky, it can attract insects. So it's very important to rinse carefully. But of course, we are doing this all the textile flat, no action, very calm, only pat, pat, pat like a baby. And then awas, because when you're rolling up a textile and moving it, when it's wet, it's quite heavy, it can rip. So we use PVC pipe to transport it. And we lay it flat on sheets and dry cloth to block it and dry it. Of course, I think it's important to note that for textiles that are flat, like kain panjang, selendang, many Indonesian textiles, batik, ikat, all kind, the best way to store them long-term is for rolling. And the reason why rolling is better is because when you fold a textile, you create a crease, and after some time, a crease creates a break or a split. So it's best to roll it, use a clean tube, wrap the tube with cotton, and then wrap the outside of the textile with the cotton again and tie the ends. And we practice this extensively in our workshop so that everybody would learn how to prepare a tube and roll textiles. Smaller textiles can be rolled and then placed inside boxes or inside drawers, a way to organize. And also, it's a good idea sometimes to color code using different colored ribbon. For example, if some of the textiles are extremely fragile, if you put a red ribbon around it, then immediately when you go to take the textile out of the collection or from your lamari, you know if it has a red tag on it that it's extremely fragile, maybe it should not be opened, maybe you need to prepare a new table or you need a colleague to help you. So one of the probably the most common ways that we repair batik and we repair textiles is by hand stitching. Many times if you have a hole or a tear, you know this from your clothing, even your blue jeans, if you get a hole, if you don't fix it, the hole gets bigger. So this is the same for some of the textiles in our museum collection. And so doing a very minimal and careful repair can help to prevent more damage. A lot of times the repairs involve using a patch support from behind, using a very lightweight fabric. I think it's important here to recognize that this is about hand stitching, not machine stitching, and that we kind of take stitching for granted. Many of us know how to stitch since we're small children. We might learn from our mothers or grandmothers, or maybe we know how to do tailoring, but it takes a lot of practice and it takes a lot of experience. And good stitching in conservation needs to be strong, but not too strong, tight, but not too tight. And it really requires developing an understanding of the materials and the skills involved. So learning about the appropriate hand stitches is very important, and the materials. So we use a variety of materials, cotton thread, very fine silk thread sometimes, and sometimes we use synthetic monofilament. Our tools often include sewing needles, hand sewing needles, and even surgical needles. And then we practice. So here's some of our workshop from 2015, and everybody made a stitching sampler. And the reason for that is that each stitch has a specific use. If you have a tear in a blue jean or a tear in a batik, you might use one stitch or a different stitch. And so practicing that stitch and knowing when to use a thicker thread or a patch support is very important. And everybody has a chance to discuss this together. Even today, I've been practicing textile conservation over 30 years. And when I do a repair with hand stitching, I discuss with my colleagues what stitch, what kind of thread I will use, what color. So it's a very meditative and thoughtful decision. And here's an example. Often we use a lightweight support behind the area of damage. Why? Because if we just take the needle and thread and we try to stitch the area where it's damaged, we might create more damage. So it's best to put a patch support, and that way our thread is anchored into that support. Here you can see the area of repair afterwards, both from the front and from the back. So the patch support supports the repair. The repair does not need to be invisible. In fact, conservation work is often quite visible, and that's okay. We are not the original artist. We are making a repair, we are stabilizing it, we are trying to extend the life of the object, of the batik, but we are not trying to be the batik artist or fool the eye. And we always try to make our conservation treatment and our work reversible. We don't want to do treatments that cannot be removed later. And always less is more. If you can put in 5 stitches instead of 10, 5 is better. So now I'll give a few stories of case studies. This is a batik also by Iwan Tirta from the maybe late 70s. Alas Alasan, it's in the US Ambassador's residence in Jakarta. It's a huge and really beautiful batik. And it's been on display there so long. Everybody knows it, everybody loves it. And this piece was so dirty and dry, and it had food and paint and tears and holes. And so it was a very big project that about 10 of us from Museum Textile collaborated together, and we worked together for 2 weeks to do this project. So the first thing we did was take it down, take it off the stretcher. You can see how filthy dirty it was. And this is, you know, Jakarta pollution, Jakarta dirt. We examined it, condition reports, and then we vacuumed it carefully, front and back, documenting areas that were very damaged. The piece, the batik, had maybe 20 years ago, they had taken it down and they had turned it around. And so, in fact, it was very faded on one side from the sun, and then they turned it around and then they faded the other side. So both sides had lost a lot of color. We built a very large tank, and together we wet cleaned it. And this particular batik, we had to use the detergent 2 times. It was very, very soiled. And then we carefully rolled it up, brought it inside the conservation lab, and then we started the campaign of stitch stabilization. In the photograph on the bottom, you see the different color squares. Well, that is the back. And this is where we put pieces of colored lightweight cotton, which are patch supports for holes. And here you see an example of detail of the deer. It's quite in the center of the batik, and there were quite large holes. And so we put patch support behind. to fill it in. This is called a compensation for loss. And then from the front, stitching carefully to couch down the areas of the original cloth to the patch support. So the work is very delicate. It takes time. And then we prepared a new support with polyester felt padding to make it softer, and with mylar to create a buffer between the wood stretcher and the wood support and the batik. We didn't want the wood acids coming into the batik again, so we created a buffer, and then we attached it to that stretcher and we installed it. And now it actually has plexiglass in front of it. So it's and the UV protective plexiglass. So it protects it from the light and from the sunlight. Another case study, as you saw in my very first slide, was the Great Seal Parang Rusak. The image on the left is the front. The front is extremely faded. It's lost so much of the color, the red, the blue, and the Parang Rusak pattern is just lost. And the image on the right is the back of the textile. So this piece had been hung in a stairway. It received a lot of light, and it was very damaged. This one was glued and taped onto a very large piece of wood. It took several days to remove it from this. We had to work very slowly using both solvent, some detergent, mechanical action to release tape, to release glue. So it had been repaired and fixed many times. And you can see that we had to remove sellotape. And once we remove the tape, of course, there's a big hole. So this textile was in quite delicate and fragile condition. Again, we vacuum, we use tulle netting to protect the areas that are fragile. We did the color testing, and then we wet cleaned it. And the success of wet cleaning was remarkable. The textile after the wet cleaning is much softer and supple, and the acidity is removed. It does not bring back the color. And then there were remaining repairs, again, stitch repairs using a stitch stabilization technique. And finally, a border was put on it so that it could be handled or it could be pinned up lightly. This textile is actually still too fragile for permanent display. So when the embassy asked that this textile be returned to Jakarta and put on permanent exhibition in the embassy, we know that it would not survive the permanent display. It is too weak, even with the treatment. So one of the things that we did in this project was to create replicas of 3 of Iwan's batiks in order to create copies of the pieces that Iwan had made. And this was, in a sense, this was a conservation solution. The original pieces were too fragile to go on view. So therefore, we worked with some of Iwan's original batik artists, and we had them make a replica, which can be on permanent display. So because the originals came back to Washington, we were able to take a professional photograph of them, ratio 1:1. It was printed on canvas cloth. The canvas cloth was shipped to Indonesia, went to Pekalongan, where the batik workshop, the same batik artists that Iwan originally worked with, participated in this project and made new replicas of the Great Seal Parang Rusak. And this is quite a remarkable process. Here we're sitting on the floor and we are working with the photo on canvas. That's not the old batik, that is the photo on canvas. So the color was perfect. And here they are in Pekalongan working on this project and completing the replicas. And here today is the replica of the Great Seal Parang Rusak. And please note that Iwan Tirta's signature was copied as it appeared on the original, but below that, it says replica by Mugi Raharjo in Pekalongan in April of 2017. So it's very important for the authenticity and the integrity of this piece that it not be confused with the original. And this was the same we did for the other Great Seal. So this was a conservation solution because these were such emblematic and important one-of-a-kind pieces by Iwan Tirta, and the originals were too fragile, and the color was lost and the design was lost. So there was a decision made to make the replica. So now I want to just turn to a few batiks in America. We don't really think of batik being American, but by 1910 or 1915, batik, the batiks of Java were starting to become quite popular. And Peter Meyer, in 1919, wrote a book called Batiks and How to Make Them. Of course, he was Dutch, he'd been in Java, and his book became a huge success. It was published 9 editions, and his book had great influence. And here you can see photographs on the bottom left of 2 society ladies in Palm Beach in Vogue magazine, 1921, wearing batik bathing suit wraps. And on the right-hand side are a series of 4 batik dresses made by women in the home economics department at the University of Wisconsin. All of the artists who made these were followers of Peter Meyer. And so batik and a kind of interest in anything Javanesque became very popular at that time. And one of the batik artists I've had the good opportunity to work on many of her pieces is Marguerite Zorak. And she was an American painter and a textile artist, batik maker, embroiderer, and she was a leader in modernism. In fact, she exhibited in the 1913 Armory Show, which was the first international modern art show in New York City. Her batiks are wonderfully whimsical. They also combine the elements of the arts and crafts movement. She used a chunting. She loved the use of crackling. She also put elements of her painting and monumental figures and the Art Deco images and motifs of that time. So you can see in both the overall dress and the details, the wonderful animals and human figures that she put into her batik. Here's Zorak in maybe 1920 in her studio. And you can see how much her batik and her painting share the motifs. One writer, one author who's written a book about Zorak said she was frighteningly poor, yet desperately artistic. And all 4 of these photographs are examples of Zorak's batik dress with her own repairs. She made all of the clothing for her children and her husband. In fact, her husband said that my wife makes all my clothes for me except for my shoes and my suit. So you can see here how she valued her clothing and how she took pieces of batik to patch and to hand repair her actual batik clothing. So I think that this is a really beautiful example of repair that's very sensitive and very artistic. The Smithsonian American Art Museum in Washington, D.C. has over 200 of her artworks, and they have maybe about 40 or 50 textiles. And I've had the great fortune of being able to work on them, catalog, survey, prepare them for storage, exhibition, and for loans. So I'll just show you a few of these pieces. I think you can see some of the influence of Javanese batik in them, and how it blends with the modernism and the fauvism and cubism of that period. Here's a shawl down below, which looks, has very strong elements of Javanese design. Here's a silk scarf that is in the Museum of Fine Arts. And note how she used the same crackle as in the Javanese batik. And here's a small scarf, a silk scarf that is in the American Art Museum here. So this particular textile was being borrowed by another museum, and it's actually in very fragile condition. It has a lot of tears. The corners are torn. It's very, very fragile. So I did stabilization and repairs using a very lightweight sheer silk crepeline to support the tears and to support the areas that were weak and along the edges. In the top photograph, you can see the sheer silk crepeline that I used. And then you can see how I wrapped it around the edges and around the corners, and just using very, very fine silk thread. But it was going out on loan for an exhibition. So what I did finally make was a passive display. So I made a mount, covered the mount with cotton fabric. I put the Zorak silk batik on top of it, and then I took the sheer silk crepeline and stretched it over the batik and attached it onto the bottom of the mount. So I did not need to stitch or pin the Zorak textile. It was too fragile for stitching and pinning. But in fact, the silk crepeline holds it in place. It creates a slightly different color, but it's actually quite a successful and passive method to secure the textile for exhibit and for transport. So finally, I have a mystery batik that came into my studio. So this is maybe 10 years ago. It was hand spun silk. It was in very poor condition, holes and tears all over it. And I ask you all, please, if anybody has any idea where this could be from or who made it. I tried to do quite a lot of research and could not find any kind of information. So because it had holes and tears all over it, I decided, well, first I did the testing and stabilized it temporarily and wet cleaned it because it was very dirty and it had been eaten by insects and it was very dry. But then I decided to do a full adhesive lining. So I used semi-sheer silk into which I dispersed a reversible acrylic adhesive called Lascaux, very low percent, 5%. It's a similar adhesive that's used for painting lining, but this is because there were tears and holes all over the textile. So if I had done patch supports, it would have looked like Band-Aids all over the textile. So in this case, using a full support and using an adhesive support was my decision. And then in each of the areas, I was able to gently bring the areas of the damage together and then using heat, set it. It was set and secured with heat. So after that quite elaborate treatment, it took many, many days, quite frankly. We added a border and then built a proper supportive mount and then attached it. And the reason why we add the border is we don't want to put any more tack holes or nail holes into the actual batik. The batik's not strong enough. So that was the mystery textile, mystery batik, and appreciate your feedback. So I think I just want to say in closing that, you know, I have blended both my own knowledge and my training in Western and empirical conservation with practices and knowledge that I've learned working in Indonesia and working in other countries. And certainly the knowledge from our elders and from the Ibu. I truly believe that the Ibu know more about batik and how to take care of them than any of us. And I think that this is the best way to put together the most successful model for conservation. That conservation has to take on the shape of the place that it is in. That the conservation that's done in a high-tech lab in Chicago doesn't necessarily work in a small atelier in Jogja. But we have the same capacity to do the best work. And so I think that there's no one way, and ultimately successful conservation comes from your own history and your own understanding of your own culture, and certainly a tremendous sensitivity to the climate that you live in. You're in the tropical climate. It has specific problems, and the materials and how they're going to respond. And lastly, your curiosity and your dedication to create a sustainable practice. So, terima kasih banyak to Jakarta Museum Association, Jakarta Conservation Center, to Ardi, to Ibu Ari, and everyone at Museum Textile who supported me in 2015 and 2016. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Julia, for such a wonderful and practical, right? And interesting presentation, of course. And it's a beautiful journey, right? And we can say experiences that you have done here in Jakarta. So it's the experience that you have in Jakarta is one of your most memorable experience for your conservation journey, Julia?
Absolutely. Yes, indeed. It was, well, I felt like I was coming home. I hadn't been to Indonesia in many years, but it was a homecoming. And I was able to work with the most wonderful group of people at Museum Textile, not just the people at the museum who are amazing, but people came from all around Indonesia to learn, and to learn by doing. That was the beautiful thing about the workshop, was we were given this collection in poor condition and said, please fix it. But we get to work on it all together and problem solve together and learn together. So I think I learned more from my colleagues than they learned from me. So
yeah, maybe that's the best part, that if you you and the rest of the crew is like giving suggestion to each other, right?
Absolutely, yes.
And of course, now we are come to the question and answer session. Julia, we have so many questions from the floor for today's webinar, and I'd like to have a question from all the participants. So if you want to talk with Julia itself, you can raise hand, or if you are more convenient to write down your concern, maybe your questions or impressions about Julia's presentation, you can write down in the chat box or in the YouTube live chat. So I can see, wait a second. If you
are you reading the chat? I haven't looked at the chat.
Yeah, I have all the questions in the chat box. So
okay.
Beforehand, before the floor, if you want to ask once again, just raise hand, and we can unmute your questions either in Bahasa or English. It's better because Julia is can answer the question right away, or
Okay, well, I see Benny asking a question. Selamat pagi, Benny.
Yeah.
Selamat pagi Julia. At last I can join the meeting.
Good.
Ben, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
Okay,
You have
so
a question?
Mas Betty, have any question for Julia?
Yeah, I have a question. So
Please.
just okay. We have a case in the textile museum, Julia. So there is a very old textile with a very lot of hole on it, and then we do the full backup.
Yeah.
And then the problem is after the full backup, there is more damage to the textile because there is wrinkles on it, and when we roll it, I'm afraid that it will be a tear. So how to fix the problem? Or maybe we didn't do the full backup properly, or maybe something else, or should we keep the backup, or should we remove the backup and let it without the full backup? And
I know. Well,
another question is, this is about the Tyvek. So can the textile breathe when we cover with the Tyvek? That's my question. Thank you.
Tyvek, which is a polyethylene-based material, and it is semi-permeable. Semi-permeable. So, for example, if you wrap your textile in Tyvek and the roof collapses or the pipe breaks and there's rain or water, it will not protect from the water 100%. But it will protect more than a piece of cotton. It's semi-permeable. So to answer your question, it's semi-breathable.
Semi-breathable.
It's semi-permeable, but it's not like plastic. It does have some breathing capability, but it's actually a good buffer from moisture as well. Back to your backup question. Is it a batik or is it another kind of textile?
It's a batik. It's an old batik from 19th centuries.
Okay. So there are many, many things that can happen there. The fabric for backup maybe is too thick or not fine, and maybe not fine enough. Maybe the stitching to attach the backup to the batik is too much or too strong. The tension of the old batik and the tension of the backup is not the same.
Okay.
And it's very difficult to get them the same. And I understand sometimes the full backup is completely necessary because there's so many holes that you can't even touch the batik without putting full support, full backup. I guess possibly looser stitches. The other thing is that because if you can get both tension just about the same, you won't have the wrinkling problem. However, when it's flat, it's okay.
Yeah.
It doesn't have wrinkles.
Yeah.
When it's flat, it's okay.
But we roll it.
So another solution is to roll it on a very big diameter tube.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because the smaller the tube, the more revolutions. But if you take a big tube and you can take a PVC pipe and you can put padding, so the bigger the tube, the only a few rolls, and it's much more gentle. So you don't get the same amount of wrinkles.
Yes.
And then you can also put tissue in between that, and that will help soften some of the wrinkles. But full backup and rolling is always a problem.
Thank you, Julia.
Thank you,
But-
Mas Benny. Terima kasih. And it's the question from Mas Benny is in line to Mas Iwa from Galnas. He said he said that how to conserve or restoration the batik cloth or batik painting that has degraded, damaged, it's torn and tear, especially in the middle part, which has many motifs in it. Is it possible that we just back up the pieces, or we can do anything like the Zora, maybe the repair things?
On the Zorak, that was an overlay. So if there's a big hole and things like that, usually you need something that is more opaque behind it. I don't know. It's hard to say without seeing it, but I know that if there's loss of motif and large holes, usually you need to take use a piece of fabric that is opaque, not sheer. I think also, you know, look, we all get old, right? Our hair turns white, we get spots. So does the batik. You know, and part of it is we have to learn to accept aging. We have to help our clients, our museum directors understand that a hole is not a bad thing. A hole is part of history. And as long as you don't want to put that batik on display, the holes can be appreciated. If the hole is going to cause more damage, then you need to figure out a way to support it, either with stitching, or maybe you just display part of it and you show it on an angle so there's no tension hanging. So we have a lot of options for trying to, you know, respect the textile without doing too much intervention and treatment all the time. I really think one of my mottos is less is better. Less is more.
Less is
It's,
more. Right.
we are quite fortunate when we find a textile when somebody did not treat it, when it's in original condition with original damage sometimes, because a bad treatment is worse than no treatment.
Yeah. Can I say that we cannot just push something, that we can
Right.
do anything to the pieces, right?
Exactly. And we know this from, you know, stone, archaeology, architecture. There was a big movement in the 1960s. They used a lot of cement, you know, to try and fix Borobudur and all these incredible structures. Now, I mean, 20 years after that, we realized that's a terrible material to use. It's not flexible. It's not native to the material. It's not sensitive to the culture. So sometimes just sitting and saying, okay, we're not treating that. We're only going to unroll and show a small part. And this piece is very special. So that's also not treatment is treatment.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So can I explain in bahasa to Mas Iwa? Jadi Mas Iwa yang Julia sarankan adalah menggunakan backup yang buram. Jadi bukan yang apa namanya tembus terang ya di belakangnya. Jadi Julia bilang kalau batik itu sama seperti manusia, bisa menua begitu, dan menua itu merupakan bagian dari sejarah. Walaupun ada bolongnya, ada apa namanya sobekannya, memang itu bagian dari sejarah, tidak perlu dipaksakan untuk dikonservasi. Bisa kita untuk memajangnya itu tidak memaksakan juga. Artinya walaupun ada apa namanya lubang, bisa kita tutupin lubangnya biar tidak terlihat oleh masyarakat umum, dan tidak memaksakan agar lubang atau sobekannya menjadi lebih besar lagi begitu. Semoga terjawab Mas Iwa. And then we have the question from Pak Purbahutapea. Wait a second for the raise hand participant, because Pak Purba is want to ask a question for Julia. Thank you for your great presentation. This is very amazing. You have attention for batik conservation, which are not many people do, even he or she is Indonesian. We have a problem when we would like to conserve our textiles, including batik. That is, we have a shortage of conservation equipments. In 2002, a long time ago, when I was the head of International Cooperation Division of Jakarta Capital City Government, we achieved a grant from Japanese government in form of textiles equipment for textiles conservation. I do not know whether or not the equipment is still there and works. It's still there and works, Pak Purba, because we do have the equipment in Textile Museum, and we still doing the conservation with the equipment itself. And my question is it possible for us to receive a similar grant equipment from the USA government? I'm sure you can do it. Come on, Julia.
Hey, I don't work for the government. I'm freelance.
Okay.
I don't know. That's a difficult question. I think that you know, I think that alliances and cooperations and you know, having other experts come and work on specific projects is the best way to build friendships and build long-term, you know, cooperations. And we were very fortunate with the Iwan Tirta collection because it belonged to the US Embassy. It was in their best interest to conserve it and to conserve it in Indonesia. And with the Museum Textile and with colleagues in Jakarta, that was the perfect solution. It would be crazy to send it all to America or to Holland for treatment. So this was a really lovely and smart way to build friendship and build diplomacy and build skills and build friendships. So I think that anything is possible. If there's equipment that was given many years ago, it might be a good idea to examine that equipment and see how it can be fixed, how it can be renovated or transferred to another museum or given, you know, a new life somehow. I don't really know. I mean, and I think that there are lots of opportunities for cooperation, but I think it's best to look at some of the big international organizations, and there's ICOM and IIC and the Getty and all kinds of international. I think, Linda, you can probably say something here. I don't know, because you were in charge of the Jakarta conservation. So I'm sure that you work on these cooperations.
So there will be a lot of possibility, right? Yeah, we do have cooperation with any other countries and any other institution or association, right, Julia?
Absolutely. And you know, the project we did, the workshops we did on traditional plant remedies for caring for textiles using traditional methods, that was supported through the ministries of education through ASEAN.
Yeah.
You know, so the ASEAN budget is enormous. And a lot of the ASEAN budget goes for, you know, security and military. And there's a budget there for education and for culture. And so I think it might be great if people can tap into that budget for specific uses for cultural purposes. But that project that we did and all those workshops that we did, Benny was part of it. We had many people from 12 different countries. It was all supported through the ministries of education. So, and it wasn't fancy. It was simple, you know, so.
Just like you said, less is more. We can do more with less equipment, I think.
Right, right.
Okay. Next to the YouTube question, I'm sorry because the participant of raise their hand, it's missing from my list of participant. You can raise hand again now.
I've been, Julia, we've been trying to provide the better equipment in especially in Pusat Konservasi Cagar Budaya. So we try step by step. Because we have to serve people who wants to conserve, or maybe the institution wants to conserve their collection. So for the equipment, which we've been trying to provide better in every year, and also maybe the change of technology also we try to provide the equipment.
Yeah, no, it's important.
Thank you, Raju. Thank you,
Julia. There's different levels also of conservation. You know, we have conservation administration and we have conservation science, and then we have collection management, which I happen to think is one of the most important part of it, because preventive conservation and stopping the insects and stopping the mold and stopping the rain actually can do more to protect a collection than specific treatments. So I think that we play so many different roles in preserving cultural heritage and preserving batiks. So if you have 500 batiks and 50 of them have damage, but none of them are properly rolled, the first priority is to condition report, photograph, roll them, and make a list of what you hope you can treat later when you have time. But first, get all of them into better condition. You know, it's like a preventive healthcare. You get your immunization, then you're going to be okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Julia. We go to the next question. We have question from Bapak Muhammad Taufik Andi. Is there any difference in conservation between batik that uses chemical dyes and natural dyes? Because as far I know, batik with natural dyes have different adhesion power with chemical dyes.
They do, and I think that it's actually easier and safer with the natural dye batiks. My experience is that the older and natural dye batiks are more stable. The chemical dyes, many of them are not very stable, particularly from different periods of history. And then some of the batik dye is sort of painted on. It's not dyed, it's a paint, and it's not very stable. But yes, and that's why testing the dyes first before any kind of wet cleaning or solvent cleaning is very important, because you know, any cleaning process can start to reverse the dye process. So,
okay. So there's a little bit difference.
Yes, there is. And
okay.
I'm not, I mean, I don't analyze the dyes every time I do a wet cleaning. Generally, I know you can tell from what time period it is or some of the history, whether it's a natural dye or whether it's a chemical dye, and experience. But in some laboratories, they're able to test the dyes, but usually that's in order to analyze for historic reasons and not just for cleaning purposes.
Okay. The next question is come from Gede Diaksa. Dear Julia, I'm very grateful you took the time out of your busy schedule to address these very important topics. I feel fortunate to join this lecture, especially since not so many Indonesians have expertise on textile conservation, and really great appreciation for what you have done with the Iwan Tisa collection. Just a simple question from me. How long the batik will be in good condition after it's being restored and need to be restored again? As in painting, as far I know, it will be a good condition about 50 years after restoration. Thank you. Gede Diaksa from Directorate Jenderal Kebudayaan from the Ministry of Education and Culture of Indonesia.
Well, we don't have a crystal ball for predicting how long our treatments and our, you know, how long the treatments and the stability will remain. I think a lot of that depends on the environment that the textile is kept in. So for example, the pieces that were conserved and remounted and reframed and put back in the US Embassy, they are all archival acid-free material in the mount and the frame. They're protected with UV protective plexiglass, so the office light, the sunlight will not affect it. And all the acid was neutralized when cleaning. So they should stay stable for a very long time, particularly because the building is air conditioned, it's climate controlled, it's not open with the pollution coming in. So that's kind of hermetically sealed like a hospital. So you'd think that it could last there a long time. Now, a similar batik, if I put it on my wall in my house with no air conditioning and no glass in front of it, then the conservation treatment might not last more than 30, 50 years. We don't know. Here in Washington, we have a similar climate in the summer to Jakarta. It's very hot, it's very rainy. We get mildew and mold. So it's really about the environment and how something is protected and cared for.
Okay. So Julia, we have loaded with the questions, but unfortunately we have just 10 minutes left in this session. So I have a question from the YouTube chat live. Thank you very much for you are joining in the YouTube. It's from Ibu Laksmi Juwita. It's a very simple and quick question. Julia, what's your suggestion to best keep the batik? At the very best, maybe the minimals, because we do have like batiks in the house, maybe in the household, not in the museum collection. How we just the best to
keep them at home, you mean?
Yep.
To keep them at home?
Yep.
Well, I think again, I think the Ibu in Java know best, and they check them all the time. After so much rain, they take them outside and they dry them. They look for the insects, they clean them off, they refold them, put them away again. I mean, this is love and care and good housekeeping. And if you can roll them, that's even better. But I think that would be the best.
So we rolled, it's the best way to put the batiks?
Kain panjang and selendang, yes, I would say rolling it is best.
Yeah. And is it possible that we can just wet the clothes, or maybe we just like hanging in the wall hanging, something like that?
Well, it's difficult because kain panjang are very long, and so how do you hang them? You know, nobody has a closet at home where you can hang everything. I think it gets too difficult. So I think either rolling, or if they're folded, you have to remember to refold them again differently after maybe 1 year so that the fold does not become permanent.
Okay, so we do the conservation like type of things like regularly or periodically, Julia?
Yes, yes. You should check your collections and things at home once or twice a year, especially when the weather is changing, or during very, very monsoon wet period. You know that there's mold, there's mildew, insects increase, then you need to be looking more carefully and checking and taking things outside or somewhere, or putting the fans so that there's no mold. So
like less is better, like you said before. And this is the last question for the session from Khalifa. Good morning, Julia, and all the participants of this webinar. According to Miss Julia, what should the younger generation do to be able to contribute to preserving batik? Is there any place for younger generation to contribute? Maybe Miss Linda from the Conservation Center of Jakarta can also answer this question. Maybe this is for the younger generation that concerned about how we can act or how we can contribute to preserve the batik.
Ya, saya kira banyak yang bisa kita lakukan, terutama untuk generasi muda. Ya, sekarang kita bilang generasi milenial. Jadi untuk melestarikan batik, ya cintailah batik, kemudian gunakan batik setiap waktu, dan jika bisa kita bisa memberikan mempelajari motif-motif yang batik yang ada di Indonesia, sehingga ketika orang lain menanyakan kita bisa tahu apa dari makna dari batik yang kita pakai. Selain itu saya kira why not kita bikin satu wadah namanya Friends of Pusat Konservasi Cagar Budaya. So saya sangat menghargai itu, dan mari sama-sama kita lestarikan batik Indonesia. Terima kasih.
Iya, terima kasih Bu Linda. How Julia, as the younger generation can contribute?
I think the younger generation, from what I see already when I visited Jakarta, the young generation are very interested in batik. They're interested in the story, the history of Indonesia, and they're interested in the social issues of the day. They're interested in climate and protecting the climate. They're interested in, creating a safer planet. And I think that those things come together in batik. I think the younger generation can use batik as a form of message and a form of communication. And by wearing batik, designing batik, it's part of a global change to protect and make the world a safer place and raise the awareness of the older people to the beauty of something handmade that's unique, that has a message. I think the next generation is already there.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Julia. And thank you very much for all the participants. We are very honored that so many questions that come along in this webinar. We are very sorry that we cannot answer it live. But is it possible, Julia, that the question from the floor will be delivered to you and we send to the participants?
Oh, you can send it to me, right? Later?
Okay. Baik, jadi Bapak Ibu hadirin sekalian, untuk pertanyaan-pertanyaan yang belum dapat terjawab, nanti akan kita sampaikan kepada Julia dan akan kita kirimkan ke alamat email masing-masing. Dan jangan lupa untuk Anda yang menginginkan e-sertifikat, kita sudah menyiapkan link untuk presensi di chat box. Silakan langsung bisa tuliskan alamat email di sana. Nanti kita juga akan kirimkan untuk jawaban-jawaban dari Julia. Okay, thank you. That will be the end of the Q&A session. And any last remarks from Julia?
Terima kasih, everyone. Wonderful to see you. Thank you for participating.
Okay.
Very honored. Very honored. Thank you, Linda. And thank you, Adi. Thank you, Adi.
Thank you, Julia. And
Thank you, Julia. Thank you very much.
So if you want to reach up the Julia M. Brennan, you can click on www.caringfortextiles.com. Once again, www.caringfortextiles.com. Once again, thank you very much, Julia Brennan, live from the Washington, D.C., USA. This is very evening there. So once again, thank you very much. And of course, thank you for the Jakarta's Cultural Center. Thank you, Bu Linda, Jakarta's Museum Association. Thank you, Pak Yiyo, for making this webinar with very interesting topics. And to all the participants of today's webinar, thank you once again, and hopefully the presentation will give you benefit. And I'm Ardi Haryadi from Jakarta Textile Museum. Back to Sena.
Thank you, Mr. Ardi. That was wonderful and full of insight with us in conservation of batik. And thank you for so much explanation, Miss Julia and Ardi. Now the last agenda is photo session and closing. First of all, I would like to make sure that your photo or your camera is turned on. Don't forget to fill the e-form for the coordination for the e-certificate in a chat box. So you can find the link at the checkbox and you can fill the blank. After that, we can distribute that certificate in 12 o'clock afternoon. Oke, Mas Dimas siap? Baris pertama, silakan senyum.
Baris pertama.
Baris pertama.
3, 2, 1. Oke, baris kedua.
Baris kedua.
Tahan dulu ya.
Baris pertama udah tadi nih.
Tahan 3, 2, 1. Sip. Baris ketiga.
Baris ketiga terakhir.
Baris tiga nggak nyalain.
Ada yang nggak nyalain?
Kamera sedikit doang. 3, 2. Sama Seno.
Sudah, baik. Now the last agenda is photo session and closing. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that's all for today. Thank you and apologize previously if any other word that less pleasing to the audience here. Let us close this national seminar, talk about the batik conservation with Mrs. Julia M. Brennan by saying, Hamdallah. This event was held thanks to the collaboration of the DKI Jakarta Provincial Cultural Office, DKI Jakarta Provincial Cultural Heritage Conservation Center, in collaboration with the DKI Jakarta Museum Association Paramita Jaya, and the management unit of the Art Museum and media partner Trans 7. On behalf of the crew on duty, I would like to say thank you for all audience and speaker. Meet again in others webinar with me, with PKCB, and with Ami Paramita Jaya. Salam museum. Museum di hatiku. Selamat siang semuanya. Terima kasih.
Selamat siang.
Evening, Julia.
Terima kasih banyak. Bang Seno, Bang Ardi.
Thank you, Julia.
Sampai jumpa, Bu Linda.
Mas Dimas.
Terima kasih.
Sampai jumpa
Bu Erlinda. Terima kasih banyak semuanya. Semuanya Bu Linda.
Terima kasih, Bu. Ayo.
Mas Ardi.
Izin, Bu
Makasih Pak Norvi. Pak Norvi ada di ini. Ada di Joy.
Ibu Linda izin.
Ya.
Ada grup yang sudah kami buat. Ada request untuk bisa dipertahankan grupnya. Silakan nanti akan kami jadikan adminnya dari PKCB ya Bu, untuk menjadi embrionya friend of PKCB ya.
Oke, sip. Terima kasih. Terima kasih Mbak Besari. Halo Pak Norvi.
Ya, Bu Linda izin boleh sampaikan satu.
Dukungannya acara ini.
Bu Linda, boleh saya sampaikan say something lah gitu kan?
Iya.
Boleh ya?
Boleh silakan.
Mantap, sukses.
Thank you semua berkat dukungan.
Ketemu lagi. Bu Asyadi, sehat.
Alhamdulillah.
Halo Ibu Hasijani.
Iya.
Dari apa?
Paramita.
Ya. Terima kasih banyak atas kehadiran Ibu.
Terima kasih.
Terima kasih.
Izin pamit.
Terima kasih banyak Pak Is. Ketemu lagi di webinar.
Iya,
Ketemu terakhir di Jogja ya.
Iya.
Konservasi di acara.
Bu Linda pamit
Dalam?
ya, Bu Linda.
Iya, makasih Mas Bayu.
Pak Ari, semua, Mas Ardi, makasih, Bu Esti.
Siapa yang ngasih nomor?
Pamit. Pamit semuanya. Assalamualaikum.
Ya, Pak. Makasih semuanya, Bang Sena.
Bukan.
Di Bora itu.
Siapa gitu? Saya pikir Lela.
Ini Pak Kurnia.
Dulu, mikir.
Sekali lagi terima kasih banyak buat semuanya. Bang Ardi, makasih ya Bang Ardi.
Baik Bu, masih ini, masih.
Where are you at the moment? In
The museum Bu.
Textile or?
Yes, I'm in my office.
Oh, di museum, oke.
Alhamdulillah lancar Bu, itunya sinyalnya.
Alhamdulillah lancar ya Mas Ardi ya.
Iya Bu. Banyak pertanyaan
ada
Bu,
juga
jadinya rame
ada
Bu.
yang minta untuk dibuat seri. Jadi pertemuan kegiatan ini dibuat seri. Mungkin nanti kita coba untuk logam, untuk konservasi logam, konservasi batu, konservasi lukisan gitu dengan.
Setuju Bu.
Kita coba undang narasumber yang mumpuni.
Iya, setuju. Ini sukses Bu, banyak pertanyaannya sampai bingung saya.
Iya, alhamdulillah.
Iya.
Alhamdulillah. Yang di YouTube gimana ya? Yang di YouTube?
Di YouTube kurang tahu deh, Mas Budi kayaknya.